Hello, I'm here to show an example that I didn't get to in lecture for week 7. So we just covered data management in lecture, and so I wanted to do an example of kind of combining loops, functions, and importing data into sort of one code. And I wanted to give another example of how to develop some logic or an algorithm. So this is actually great practice for the exam coming up next week and also for the next quiz. So the idea here is that I want to do an example where you have a set of data. So the step 1, the like human step, is that you have some data. And the purpose of the algorithm is going to be that the data that's inputted has some text in it, some character strings, and some of the text has incorrectly recorded duplicate values or characters. So here's an example of an array, and some of the words have basically a double letter in them. And so you want to write an algorithm that can read in this array and remove any location where there's 2 letters. So you're making the assumption that any duplicate value is not natural or it's not wanted. So words that already have double letters would not be included in this example. So we're going to go through the algorithm of how to do that. And right here, there's always just 2 H's. So for now, we want to remove double H's. But you could actually write this in general and just remove any duplicate values. And so that's actually what I'm going to do. So we're going to check if neighboring characters are the same. So the first step after you get the data, either imported or you have a variable definition, is to check if, for example, the first element and the second element are equal. And if that's true, you want to remove one of them. So either the first element or the second element. So it doesn't matter which duplicate value you remove, so you could set this up to remove either 1 or 2, but you want to remove one of them. And then you want to repeat number 2 for all adjacent elements. So this algorithm only works for duplicate values that are next to each other. So it's not going to look to check if like this letter matches the one next to it or the one next to it or the one next to it. It's only going to check the one immediately neighboring it. So we want to go through, we kind of understand the steps of the algorithm. We want to go through and kind of connect these steps with what you would do in MATLAB. So to start out, you need some data. So it's either a variable definition or possibly importing some data in. So that one is step 1. If we're checking a condition, that is an if statement. And that if statement will have a relational condition that checks if that's true. To remove an element, the syntax to remove an element, the easiest way is to set that element equal to an open and closed bracket. And that removes that element. And so if the text array is originally 10 big and you remove some element of that text array, then it will only be 9 big. And then we have a repeat structure. So remember, repeating is always a loop. Loops repeat commands. So we either need a while loop or a for loop. And the thing that's different about this algorithm versus the algorithms that we wrote in the last assignment is that you are going to need a while loop because text is getting smaller. So you don't know how many elements are going to be duplicated when you write this. So basically, you don't know how many times you're going to have to run the loop or check because every time you remove an element, it's going to reduce the size. So you need a while loop so that you can keep checking the current size of the array that you're removing elements from, and reevaluate each time. So we're going to just think about how we might write this up. So step 1 is going to just be the definition or the import of that array. So it'll either be that or something. The one I'm going to show you is a spreadsheet. Sorry. So we're going to do XLS read and read in the spreadsheet, the file name right there. So one of those two is going to be step 1. Then we know that we're going to have a while loop. So anytime we have a loop in our code logic that we're kind of writing out, we're just going to create the wrapper for the loop. So this is kind of step 3. And we need some counter. So we're going to initialize the counter to 1. We're going to advance the counter at the bottom of the loop. And we're going to keep running until we've reached the end of the loop or until k is less than the length of the array that you're removing the elements from. And so that sets up our loop to run for step 3 here, repeating number 2 for until it reaches the end. And then after that, we just need our if statement. So basically, we're going to set if text of k equals text of k plus 1. We're going to end it, and we're just going to remove one of them. So I'll just remove the first one. It doesn't matter which one. And that's the basic idea of the structure. Some people think it makes more sense to create this other variable, so something like stop that equals length of text, and so every time it finishes removing an element, it will recalculate the length of x, and then replace this with the word stop. They do the same thing, but sometimes this is more reassuring because you know this gets calculated in the loop and it will be updated up there, but it does work the same way. So I'm going to move over to MATLAB and I'm going to show you how I programmed this up so that you can see it. So here is my function that I wrote, and for now I'm actually going to move it into a new file so you can kind of see it work with just one example first. So I've named the function remove duplicates. It has an input of x and an output of y. So the input's going to be the array that has duplicates in it. The output's going to be the array that doesn't have duplicates in it anymore. And here what I've done is I've written out the same little algorithm that I just showed you. Basically you set up a loop that runs until the length of the input is reached. You initialize to 1 and you advance. I'm creating these temporary variables, letter 1 and letter 2, just because it sometimes helps people see that you're just comparing two letters. And if those letters are the same, it's going to remove the first one by just doing this open and close bracket. And then it's setting y, which is the new text string without any duplicates in it, equal to the x, because the x had them removed. So you can think about that a little bit more. But let me just show you a couple of things. So I'm going to create an example text string, my name, with 2 ends, which it does not have. It only has 1 end. And if you want to remove one of the ends in that array, all you do is you access the end that you want to remove. So 1, 2, 3, the fourth n, the fourth letter, which is the first n, you're going to access it from that array. And if you set it equal to an empty array, it will erase it. And now if I just print the array or look at it right here, now it doesn't have that value in it. And it works the same with numeric arrays. So if I create a numeric array and I want to remove the second element, oops, sorry. If I want to remove the second element, I call on the array, which is example 2. I access the second element, which is 4, and then I remove it by doing open and close brackets. And so now you see the 4 from the original array is no longer there. So that is what this is doing, but it's able to remove any duplicate value. So if I go back and I define my name again with the double ends, and then I call my function, which I called remove duplicates, and I input in the string that I would like to remove, you can see that it outputs the output as the same. It removed it. And we could try anything in here. The way we have it set up is it doesn't even need to be a string, so we could even give it an array. I put in 2 7s, and when it outputs it, it takes one of them out. So that's how the function works. Now I want to go to this code and show you how you can set up functions within each other. So this is moving on to topic 6. So I have a main function that I'm calling lecture data, and then I have a function under it which I'm calling remove duplicates, the function I just wrote. I did move that into this folder here, so I'm going to delete that so that I know that it's using the one from within the file. It actually does by default look for the ones into the file, and then it looks for the ones into the folder, but I don't like to have files that are the same, or functions that are the same, because if I edited one, I might get confused about which one it's using. So let's start by, I'm going to comment out all of this that I've already written. And so here's my function, and then here's my main function, which it's doing nothing right now. So I'm going to call the function from within another function. So I showed you how to do this in lecture. And I'm just going to make sure it's working. So I'm going to put in a string that has duplicate letters, and you can see that when I run my lecture data function, I'm getting out an output that's correcting that. So that's how you call a function within another function. So now I want to do it to a bunch of numbers. So I showed you this file in lecture. So I'm going to unsuppress this and run this and show you what this gives me. So all I'm doing here is I'm doing an XLS read command on a duplicate data example spreadsheet. And I showed you this spreadsheet in lecture, but basically this spreadsheet is a column of names that have double letters in them. So when I read it in using XLS read, I already ran this, I sent the output to an array called numbers and an array called text. Numbers should be empty because I have no numeric values in the spreadsheet, and then the text is holding all of those names that I just showed you. So now I want to run my function for all the names in that file. So I'm just going to set up a loop, and I'm going to run the loop from 2 to the length of text because there was a header on the file. The header on the file had the word names in it, so I'm going to skip that header, start at 2, and I'm going to just plug in the element of the cell array, which is a text string, and I'm going to save it to a new variable, another cell array, which is the edited text, which has the duplicates removed. And then I will just print my final text array, text edited, after the loop to see if it worked. So when I run my code, you can see that I have my original arrays with the duplicates, and then all of them were edited because I ran them through the function. And then finally, to give you one more example of how you can use data management, is I could save all of those fixed names now to a new file. So this will save them to a MATLAB file using the .mat extension, or I could use XLSWrite, and I could save fixed names.xlsx, and I could give it text edited, and we can look at what that does when you run that. I'm running my code, and it doesn't like that because it's a cell array. So does it like that? So I'm just trying to get it out of the cell array, which I put it in when I created it. Yeah, there's not doing it. I have to do one at a time, actually. Okay, so it doesn't like that it's a cell array, so you can't write cell arrays to spreadsheets, so I would need to convert each element of the cell array to a string and then output it one at a time to each row. So I'd have to write a loop for it. So that's a little bit more complicated than I was wanting it to be. So we'll just write it to a MATLAB file. So if you look over here, fixed names is what I just wrote. And if you clear all your variables and I run the mat, so either double click on it or I run the load function, then I can access that data that I just created. So that's it for this. So this example was an example of practicing algorithms, loops, specifically while loops, which is what the quiz will be testing you on next time because we didn't test on while loops before. It's also testing you or showing you an example of functions and calling functions within one another, as well as reading and writing data. So great review for the exam and for the quizzes coming up.